Guernica, Spain, April 26, 1937. Engines roared above the town, bombs fell, and by nightfall, Guernica lay in ruins. The man behind it wasn't the Red Baron, but his cousin, Wolfram von Richthofen, a commander who believed cities could be broken from the air. How did he rise to become one of history's most ruthless air generals, and what became of him when the war was lost? When most people hear the name Richthofen, they think of Manfred, the Red Baron, Germany's legendary ace of the First World War. His scarlet triplane became a symbol of death in the skies, but while Manfred's legend endured, another Richthofen would carve out a very different legacy. Wolfram, his younger cousin, was born in 1895 into the same aristocratic Silesian family. Unlike Manfred, Wolfram never radiated the glamour of a fighter pilot. He wasn't a natural daredevil, nor was he destined to become a hero of the skies. His path was quieter, more methodical, yet ultimately more destructive. If Manfred represented the romantic era of dogfights and chivalry, Wolfram embodied the modern, mechanized face of total war. In the First World War, Wolfram began as a cavalry officer before moving into aviation. He wasn't a star pilot. Instead, he worked in reconnaissance and technical roles, gathering intelligence and managing operations. He studied the mechanics of flight and the logistics of keeping aircraft in the air. These lessons shaped him into something more dangerous than a lone ace, a planner learning how to orchestrate destruction on a grand scale. When the war ended in 1918, Germany's military was shattered under Versailles. Yet, like many ambitious officers, Wolfram stayed on in the reduced Reichswehr. He built a reputation as a clever staff officer with an eye for modern technology. Aviation was forbidden, but Richthofen immersed himself in organization and planning, absorbing the lesson that coordination between air and ground could change the face of war. Throughout the 1920s and early 30s, he developed into what we might call a technocrat of destruction. He wasn't chasing glory in the cockpit, he was studying how to link reconnaissance, bombing, and movement into a single, decisive strike. When the Nazis came to power and began rebuilding Germany's military, Wolfram was perfectly placed. The Luftwaffe needed men who could think beyond the pilot's seat, men who could see the whole battlefield from above and translate it into devastating action. By the time of the Anschluss in 1938, Richthofen had risen rapidly. Austria's incorporation into the German Reich was followed by a surge in Luftwaffe expansion, and Wolfram proved himself indispensable. Unlike his cousin Manfred, remembered for a lone red triplane, Wolfram's weapon was the squadron, the formation, the massive orchestration of air power. His true talent lay not in dueling enemy pilots, but in calculating how to bring overwhelming firepower onto cities, armies, and entire nations. In the coming years, this difference would matter enormously. While the Red Baron became a legend of air combat, Wolfram von Richthofen became infamous as the man who showed the world just how much destruction a modern air force could unleash. In 1936, Richthofen got his first chance to test modern air power, not in Germany, but in Spain. Hitler sent the Condor Legion to aid Franco's nationalists in the Spanish Civil War. It gave German commanders live combat experience before the next war. Richthofen played a leading role, coordinating air operations. On April 26, 1937, Richthofen left his mark on history. His bombers descended on the Basque town of Guernica. For hours, wave after wave of Heinkels and Junkers dropped explosives and incendiaries. Civilians were trapped in the open, the town's center incinerated, hundreds killed. Guernica was no fortress, the raid was militarily pointless, but its impact was psychological and symbolic. News of the attack spread across Europe. Newspapers showed smoldering ruins and wounded civilians. Picasso immortalized it in his mural Guernica, still one of the world's strongest anti-war statements. For the world, the town became a symbol of terror from the skies. The moment war abandoned all pretense of separating soldiers from civilians. Behind it stood Wolfram von Richthofen, who called the mission a success. Spain was his proving ground. Richthofen emerged with a formidable reputation, ruthless, efficient, and above all, practical. Civilian casualties didn't trouble him. He judged operations only by whether they broke morale and hastened victory. In Spain, he had written the template for air warfare that Germany would export across Europe. 2 years later, in September 1939, Germany invaded Poland. Richthofen applied his lessons in the bombing of Warsaw. Once again, massed aircraft struck a city full of civilians. The capital was reduced to rubble. Fires consumed entire districts, thousands were killed. As in Spain, Richthofen proved that air power could crush not just defenses, but the will to resist. By 1940, as Germany invaded France, Richthofen's name was synonymous with destruction. But here his role shifted. Instead of only terror raids, he pioneered close cooperation with the panzers, striking strongpoints, disrupting retreats, and clearing paths for breakthroughs. This integration of air and land power, the essence of blitzkrieg, made German advances shockingly swift. Within weeks, France fell. Behind the panzers, often overhead, directing the blows, was Richthofen, now one of Europe's most feared air commanders. His power wasn't in single combat, but in unleashing firestorms that consumed cities and rewrote the rules of modern warfare. By the summer of 1941, Richthofen was a general commanding Luftwaffe 4, assigned to support Army Group South in Operation Barbarossa. On the vast steppes of the Soviet Union, he would reveal both the reach and the limits of German air power. From the start, von Richthofen's units struck with overwhelming force. Luftwaffe 4 destroyed hundreds of Soviet aircraft on the ground, seizing control of the skies. But his true talent was precision and persistence. At Kiev in 1941, his bombers hammered Soviet defenses for days, helping German forces encircle more than 500,000 men, one of the largest surrenders in history. For the High Command, it proved how powerful air-ground coordination could be. From Kiev, he turned to Crimea. The fortress city of Sevastopol became his next target. Beginning in late 1941 and intensifying through 1942, Luftwaffe 4 launched one of the most relentless bombing campaigns of the war. Districts were flattened, depots annihilated, batteries silenced under constant explosives. In June 1942, Sevastopol finally fell. Hitler rewarded Richthofen with promotion, seeing him as one of the most effective and most destructive air generals. But the campaign that defined his legacy came months after, Stalingrad. As German armies closed in during summer 1942, Richthofen directed a massive air assault to break Soviet resistance. On August 23rd, his bombers dropped thousands of tons of explosives in a single day. Fires consumed districts, civilians and soldiers were buried in rubble, and Stalingrad became a smoking wasteland. Ironically, the destruction aided the Soviets. The ruins became a fortress, rubble and shattered buildings serving as natural defenses. Still, Richthofen pressed the bombardment, determined to grind the city down. Through autumn, Luftwaffe 4 flew thousands of sorties against Soviet positions along the Volga. By winter 1942-43, the limits of his strategy were exposed. When the Sixth Army was encircled, Hitler ordered the Luftwaffe to resupply it by air. Richthofen, blunt as always, said it was impossible. The capacity wasn't there, but Hitler insisted. His aircraft struggled in brutal conditions, delivering only a fraction of what was needed. The Sixth Army starved, froze, and finally surrendered in February 1943. The fall of Stalingrad was a turning point. Von Richthofen had proven himself a master of destruction, but even his precision and skill couldn't prevent collapse. He remained one of Hitler's most trusted air commanders, respected and feared for efficiency, yet increasingly frustrated by demands the Luftwaffe could no longer meet. By 1943, Richthofen's name was both respected and feared. Within the Luftwaffe, he was seen as brilliant in planning, relentless in execution, and utterly unsentimental. To his superiors, he was dependable. To his enemies, he was the architect of firestorms, Guernica, Warsaw, Sevastopol, Stalingrad. Behind it all lay a simple truth. Richthofen's method was ruthlessness. Faced with a problem, his answer was always the same: overwhelming air power to bomb the enemy into submission. For a time it worked, but by 1943-44, the battlefield was changing beyond his control. The Luftwaffe was overstretched and bleeding strength. Losses in the east were catastrophic. Allied air power grew stronger, in numbers, in quality, in reach. American bombers struck by day, the RAF by night. The Luftwaffe no longer dominated the skies. Richthofen, ever the realist, saw it firsthand. Pilots were scarce, fuel was short, losses impossible to replace. His once mighty formations shrank, sorties fell, missions grew desperate. Instead of mass raids, he now launched scattered attacks that could no longer shift the tide. By 1944, his influence began to fade. Other generals, like Albert Kesselring in Italy, commanded larger theaters and drew Hitler's attention. Richthofen was pushed aside as the Luftwaffe fought simply to survive. The doctrine he had perfected, overwhelming air power at decisive points, was no longer possible. Germany lacked the resources to execute it. Still, Richthofen remained what he had always been: blunt, uncompromising, analytical. He reported realities others tried to disguise. When Hitler demanded miracles, Richthofen gave only facts, however grim. Like many commanders, he knew the war was unwinnable long before Hitler admitted it. As the Third Reich collapsed in 1945, many generals prepared to flee, surrender, or die in battle. Richthofen faced a different fight, one inside his own body. In April 1945, as the Allies closed in, he was diagnosed with a malignant brain tumor. The once tireless commander, known for his sharp intellect and relentless energy, was struck down by illness. He held his post in name only. By May, when Germany surrendered, Richthofen was too weak to shape events. Captured by American forces, Richthofen never stood trial like Göring, Kesselring, or Löhr. Instead, he spent his final weeks in captivity, consumed by illness. On July 12, 1945, just 2 months after Germany's surrender, he died in a US military hospital in Austria. He was 50 years old. For Allied investigators preparing the Nuremberg trials, his death was anticlimactic. Here was a man tied to Guernica, Warsaw, Sevastopol, and Stalingrad, yet his case never reached the courtroom. His peers regarded him as one of the Luftwaffe's most skilled commanders. He could coordinate massive air operations, support fast panzers, and direct precision strikes, skills that drove Germany's early victories. His death spared him the judgment others faced. Alexander Löhr was executed, Albert Kesselring sentenced to life, Hugo Sperler put on trial. Richthofen's tumor meant history gave no formal sentence. Instead, his verdict lives on in the ruins of Guernica, the rubble of Warsaw, and the shattered streets of Stalingrad. 2 cousins, 2 wars, one remembered as a knight of the skies, the other as the cousin who bombed Europe into ashes. That's it for this story. Thanks for watching. If you want to see how another Luftwaffe commander's war ended very differently, watch our video on Alexander Löhr, the general who faced a firing squad in Belgrade. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you won't miss the next chapter of history. And we'll see you in the next one.